In the quiet farming town of Willow Creek, 1983 was remembered for more than just drought and dusty fields. That year marked the beginning of a mystery that would stain the town's name for generations. The Red Barn, a weathered wooden structure, standing on the outskirts, had always drawn uneasy glances from passing drivers. Locals said it was older than anyone could remember, built before the town itself. Its paint faded to the color of dried blood. Children told stories about strange lights flickering through its cracks at night and the low, creaking sounds that echoed across the fields when the wind died down. Most dismissed those tales as superstition, until three young friends decided to test them. Eleanor Hart, Mark Bell, and Brian Lowe were inseparable. They were all recent high school graduates, restless and eager for adventure before life pulled them in different directions. On the night of June 17, 1983, they told their parents they were going to camp near the river. Instead, they drove out toward the Red Barn with flashlights, a camera, and enough courage to laugh at the fear others carried. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. When morning came and the three hadn't returned, worry spread through the small town like wildfire. Eleanor's car was soon found abandoned on the dirt road just outside the barn's field. The driver's door was open, the keys still in the ignition, and one of her shoes lay half buried in the mud. The scene looked untouched, as if time itself had frozen. Police officers arrived, followed by volunteers, dogs, and search teams that combed every inch of the farmland and nearby woods. They found footprints leading toward the barn, but none coming back. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of rotting hay. The only signs of disturbance were scattered animal bones and a single broken lantern. There was no evidence of a struggle, no blood, and no trace of the missing three. For weeks, Willow Creek lived in fear. Farmers stopped working after dark, and the roads emptied long before sunset. The police investigation hit a dead end, and whispers grew into legends. Some said the barn took them. Others claimed it was revenge for something buried long ago. By the end of summer, the search had ended. The barn stood silent again, alone in the field, as if it had been waiting for them all along. And from that night onward, no one dared to go near it after dark. A decade passed before anyone dared to set foot inside the Red Barn again. The land had been sold to a new owner, a man named Thomas Reed, who moved to Willow Creek with his wife and two children in the spring of 1993. They knew the stories but dismissed them as harmless local folklore. The barn, though old and rotting, stood on valuable farmland, and Thomas planned to restore it for storage. It wasn't until the renovations began that the truth hidden beneath the floor finally surfaced. While clearing out the rotted hay and broken tools, one of the workers noticed a section of the ground that sounded hollow underfoot. Curious, they started pulling away the wooden boards and discovered a trapdoor covered in layers of dust and straw. When it was opened, a rush of stale, earthy air escaped from the darkness below. A narrow staircase led into a small underground space, barely large enough for a few people to stand. The walls were lined with rotting planks, and the ceiling dripped with condensation. Inside the room were three old sleeping bags, faded and stiff with age, a rusted lantern, and several food cans scattered around. But what caught everyone's attention was a single item on the far wall, a newspaper clipping pinned to the wood with a rusty nail. It was dated July 1983, only weeks after the three teenagers had vanished. The headline read, "Local Farmhand Missing. Police Continue Search for Peter Hensley." Detectives arrived soon after, collecting every scrap of evidence they could find. They confirmed that the sleeping bags and lantern matched items owned by Eleanor, Mark, and Brian. It appeared as though someone had been living or hiding beneath the barn during the time of their disappearance. Yet the question remained: who was it, and what had happened to them afterward? The townspeople grew restless again, their old fears reignited. Some swore the barn had always been a hiding place for something evil. Others whispered that Peter Hensley, the missing farmhand, might have been involved with the teenagers before he vanished. Whatever the truth, the unearthed room gave the Red Barn a new life of terror. Reporters flooded Willow Creek. The story spread across the state, and once again the barn stood at the center of a mystery that refused to die. But beneath all the speculation, one thing was certain. Someone, at some point, had been down there waiting in the dark. As investigators dug into the reopened case, the name Harold Kincaid surfaced, a reclusive farmer who had once owned the land where the Red Barn stood. Old records revealed that he had lived there alone for nearly a decade after his wife, Marjorie, died under unclear circumstances in 1975. Her death had been ruled accidental, the result of a fall from the barn loft, but neighbors always felt something about the story didn't add up. Harold stopped speaking to most people after that, rarely leaving his property except to collect supplies from town. He was remembered as a tall, gaunt man with sunken eyes and an expression that never changed, no matter the weather or conversation. By early 1983, Harold was in serious debt. The bank had taken most of his farmland, and only the old barn and a few acres remained. His neighbors noticed his behavior growing stranger with each passing week. Some said he talked to himself as he worked the fields. Others claimed they saw him digging at night near the barn. In March of that same year, he vanished without a trace. Police assumed he had fled to avoid debt collectors. No one searched for him long, and his disappearance soon became just another forgotten story in Willow Creek. When detectives found an old journal in the remains of Harold's farmhouse during their 1993 investigation, they were stunned by what they read. The journal described strange occurrences around the barn, whispers from under the floorboards, doors that moved on their own, and the feeling of being watched whenever he entered. As the entries went on, the handwriting grew jagged and unsteady, the words more frantic. He wrote of voices in the ground, and something he called the hunger beneath. The final entry, dated just a week before he disappeared, read simply, "The ground is hungry again." The discovery of the journal shifted the entire investigation. What had seemed like a tragic disappearance now appeared linked to something far darker. The missing teenagers, the vanished farmhand, and the strange room beneath the barn all pointed back to Harold Kincaid. But no one could determine whether he had been a killer or another victim of whatever haunted that land. His name became a curse in Willow Creek, and once again, the Red Barn stood as a monument to fear, its history deeper and darker than anyone had imagined. By 2005, the mystery of the Red Barn had settled into the background of local folklore, a chilling tale passed from one generation to the next. Most residents of Willow Creek preferred not to talk about it anymore. But that year, a small documentary team from a regional TV station arrived, determined to explore the truth behind the town's most infamous legend. They wanted to film the barn, interview locals, and see if the stories were rooted in fact or fear. What they uncovered changed everything. During the second day of filming, one of the cameramen noticed a section of floorboards that looked slightly uneven, as though something beneath had shifted over time. When they pried the boards loose, they discovered another hidden chamber below, smaller and older than the one found in 1993. A ladder led down into darkness thick with dust and decay. The air was heavy with the smell of damp soil. As their flashlights swept across the space, the crew found bones scattered along the dirt floor. At first, they assumed they belonged to animals, but closer inspection revealed something far worse: human remains. The police were called immediately, and the site was sealed off. Forensic teams arrived and began a careful excavation. What they found shocked even the most experienced investigators. Mixed with the bones were old tools, axes, hooks, and knives, each corroded with rust and stained dark. Partial remains were confirmed to belong to Peter Hensley, the missing farmhand from 1983. Another skeleton, later identified through DNA testing, belonged to Brian Lowe, one of the three vanished friends. But the other two, Eleanor and Mark, were still missing. Traces of their blood were found on some of the tools, suggesting they too had met their end in that same space. What truly disturbed investigators were fingerprints found on one of the tools, perfectly preserved despite the years. The prints matched Harold Kincaid, the man who had supposedly disappeared more than 2 decades earlier. This discovery reignited every rumor, every nightmare that had ever surrounded the Red Barn. How could Kincaid's prince still be there if he was dead? Was he the killer, or had he been part of something much worse? The findings were never fully explained. The Red Barn was declared a crime scene once again, and the whispers in Willow Creek grew louder. Some said the land itself was cursed. Others believed Harold Kincaid had never really left. In 2012, the mystery of the Red Barn resurfaced one final time when a hiker named Daniel Cross stumbled upon something deep in the woods beyond the abandoned farmland. Hidden beneath layers of vines and moss, he discovered the remains of a small wooden cabin that had almost completely collapsed. Inside, buried under debris and rotted furniture, was a rusted metal box sealed with an old padlock. When investigators opened it, they found a collection of items that would finally shed light on the horrors tied to the Red Barn. Inside the box were several faded photographs, a handful of letters, and what appeared to be fragments of human bones wrapped in cloth. The photographs were the most unsettling. They showed the missing teenagers, Eleanor, Mark, and Brian, inside the Red Barn. They were alive, sitting against the wall, surrounded by lantern light. Their faces looked frightened but obedient, as if posing for someone they didn't dare defy. In one photo, just behind them, a shadowy figure could be seen in the doorway. When enhanced, the outline matched the face of Harold Kincaid. The letters found in the box were written in Kincaid's distinct handwriting. They spoke of his growing madness after his wife's death and his belief that something beneath the earth demanded sacrifice. He claimed the voices called to him, promising peace in exchange for new life to feed the ground. The final letter ended abruptly, stating, "It will not let me stop. The hunger is eternal." The words confirmed what many had long feared. Kincaid had not only murdered Peter Hensley but also lured the three teenagers to the barn as part of his delusional ritual. Forensic experts determined that Kincaid had likely faked his own death and lived in isolation in the forest cabin for years before dying alone. The bones in the box were believed to be his, though the cause of death was never clear. Authorities officially closed the case, declaring Harold Kincaid the sole perpetrator of the Red Barn murders. Yet, even with the truth exposed, peace never returned to Willow Creek. Locals swore they still heard footsteps across the empty field at night and saw faint lights where the barn once stood. When the structure was finally torn down in 2015, no one stepped forward to rebuild. The land remains abandoned, a silent reminder that some places never forget what they've buried, and some evil never truly dies.